I'm Wendy Worden with the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library, and our small but mighty audience is wonderful, and I'm very, very happy that you're here tonight. We've been partners with Carolyn in More Than a Single Story since 2017, I think, and it's fantastic, and we love to do it. So we're super thrilled to invite Carolyn, the director of More Than a Single Story, to take center stage, or stage, what am I on? Right? And she will introduce a bit more about the event.
All right. Thank you, Wendy.
Yep. I'm not going to sit in the sweet chair.
Okay. All right, so thank you all for choosing to spend your evening with us tonight. Just a little bit about More Than a Single Story. Our mission is to position literary art as a catalyst for cross-cultural healing and social justice. We connect writers with broadly inclusive communities through readings, through public conversations, and writing workshops that foster insight, empathy, and literary skill building. We are extremely grateful to the voters of Minnesota for grants from the Metro Regional Arts Council and the Minnesota State Arts Board, and also to the McKnight, Jerome, St. Paul, and Bigelow Foundations. Their support allows us to keep our programs going. Special thanks to the St. Paul Public Libraries for partnering with us on this series of panels and workshops to celebrate fathers. And a special thanks to Wendy Worden, who worked side by side with us to make this thing happen. I'm also pleased to give a brief shout out to Nia Davis, who's back there working with us, and also to Pluto Solomon and Rachel Norton. Yay! They both just graduated from Pim Arts High School. And thanks also to the people the media outlets who graced us with publicity for this event. So, I am very, very excited about this series. The idea that was brought to me by a single father, Ben Weaver, and a young married father, Suleiman Aden. And last Tuesday, we featured the single dads, and on Thursday, June 20th, we'll do a panel with grandfathers. Tonight's panelists are young married fathers who will engage in an insightful conversation on the complexities of fatherhood in today's world. Our panelists are Jonathan
Brown,
Linus Chan, Erik Anderson, my amazing editor, Michael Torres, and our moderator is Suleiman Adam. So, we always like to begin our panels with a poem, and I'm pleased that this evening's poem will be delivered by panelist Michael Torres, and then we'll turn the event over to Suleiman. And we will have time for questions following the panel. And I want everybody to please remember to fill out both sides of this survey so that we can have an idea of how we can improve our programs. So again, I'm going to introduce Michael and Suleiman, then I'll just turn it over to you, okay? So Michael Torres was born and raised in Pomona, California, where he spent his adolescence as a graffiti artist. His debut collection of poems, An Incomplete List of Names, was selected for the National Poetry Series and named one of NPR's Books We Love in 2020. He is an associate professor in the MFA program at Minnesota State University, Mankato, and a teaching artist with the Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop. Our moderator, Suleiman Adam, wears many hats. He's a writer and a poet, writing teacher, assistant coder, community advocate, and DEI trainer. Currently, he's deputy executive director of CARE Minnesota, the nation's largest civil rights organization. His writing is published in More Than a Single Story anthology, We Are Meant to Rise. And so I will turn it over to Michael for the poem, and then Suleiman, it's all yours.
Thanks. I don't think I need the mic, do I? Good. All right. This is a more recent poem of mine, and yeah, I think it'll have to do with things that we'll end up talking about that I'll end up bringing it, especially. So it's called Trimming My Father's Beard. Home again, my mother, unable to perform the task, asks if I'll do it. Clipper case in her hand. In the garage, I oil the machine, I clean the blades. And because I'd never known how to start a conversation with my father, I play Los Mandados by Vicente Fernandez. Thumb on the switch, my father looks out at his driveway. Through the buzzing, he speaks in Spanish. Something about a friend who sang with Chente, who didn't want to do all the small gigs, about a place he hasn't seen since he was young, and how life goes like that, right? I try to answer my father. I point his chin toward the light, hold his face like something to be gazed upon. The sun warms the day beyond us. I brush his cheek as I would my own. He hums to El Rey when it plays, and I feel it, my forearm across his chest. Blink, blink once more. And what I once believed the world had picked clean from me, about how close we as men could be with one another, was not after all true. Finished, I dust the hairs from his neck, slow strokes over his shoulders. Look up at me, I ask, and he does.
Thank you so much. Well, myself and Ben Weaver, who moderated the previous panel on single fathers, came to Carolyn Holbrook about this idea for our panel. Both of us came at it from two totally different angles, but both were rooted in the same thing about the realities of fatherhood, and given the topic of today's conversation, the unsung realities of fatherhood. Not in juxtaposition to motherhood, but being able to explain it, talk through it, and discuss it as its own unique thing. The first question that I have for you all today is, first, if you'd like to tell us a bit about yourself, and then why this topic resonates with you. Now, you pass it down, you can go from left to right.
Again, my name is Michael Torres. I grew up in Southern California, which is to say it was a sort of Mexican-American cultural upbringing, very masculine, very sort of a lot of machismo, so like that was very, it was like something I was always thinking about even as I was growing up when I didn't have the language for it, and as I got older and got into writing about masculinity and masculine identity was something I was always really interested in or drawn to in my writing, and so when this topic came up and Carolyn asked about it, I thought this is all I write about basically. I always return to it, so I thought it'd be great to talk about. Yeah.
Erik Anderson. I grew up in Chicago, where I lived until I was about 20. I guess for me, the world I grew up in, is it kind of, I guess, with my family is Swedish American, and so we play things pretty tight to the chest emotionally. I kind of grew up in a space where we kind of were always loved, always protected, but also, we carried a lot of the things that we worked through internally, which is not unusual, certainly for a lot of people, but certainly that was my world. At the same time, growing up in Chicago, I spent as much time out of the house as I did in the house, and in a way I felt raised by the parents of my friends. I wouldn't say as much as my parents, but they were a huge influence on me. And so my world of fatherhood, as I now kind of see it played out with my son, who's 13, is informed by a real kind of collage of people, frankly, and experiences. And at the heart of that is my own father and the relationship I saw he had with his father. So I kind of think of that continuance, and that's a big part of why I love the opportunity to talk about this anytime I get. Really, is because it's like a mystery that I can't look away from, is trying to solve that sense of how to be the best father I might be. So.
Hi everyone. So my name is Linus Chan. I'm an immigration lawyer. I teach at the University of Minnesota Law School. I'm sort of a child of academics, and so we kind of moved all over the country. My parents divorced when I was quite young, and I lived with my mom. And so I always would get shipped around the country to go see my dad during the summer or during Christmas break. And my parents, you know, they were both refugees from the war, and you know, they were Chinese American. My dad grew up in Hong Kong, my mom grew up in Hong Kong, but they both came to the United States quite young. And I think, you know, obviously I think a lot of this gets tied into our own relationships with our parents. And my relationship with my dad, I think, was really interesting because he, despite being Chinese, he didn't have a very typical or stereotypical Chinese Asian kind of aspect to it. He was a very affectionate man. He still is, relatively so, in weird ways. Right? I'll just say this. Put it this way, he never said I love you, but at the same time, he let me sleep with him in his bed until I was like 10 or 11, right? Like, so there was a lot of affection. It just wasn't the same expression, I think. And I reflect on the idea that my father was still such a huge parent in my life, despite the fact that I didn't live with him for most of the year. I reflect a lot about the fact that he, you know, one of the things for a short period of time when I was only about 2 or 3, my mom had taken me to Hong Kong, and I was separated from my dad for a longer period, 2 or 3 years. And then and then when I came back, it was the first time I saw him, there was a really bad custody fight. But point is like, as a father to my daughter, there are times where I will think back to what that must have been like for my dad, and I can't really understand it. And so this conversation, I think, is really, for me, it's really very interesting, and I would love to I'd love to think about fatherhood, especially on this idea of like good fathers, not like, it's almost weird we're in a society where we're almost always trying to measure, and I always wonder, like, how do you measure something like fatherhood? Like, how do you measure that? How do you know when you're good, and how do you know when you're not?
So I'm Jonathan Brown. I'm originally from Colorado Springs, Colorado. So was born there. We lived on the island of Hawaii for a long time. And it was interesting because I only lived in Hawaii for about 2.5 years, but I think it made the biggest impact on me in terms of like how I developed culturally. Part of it was, if you've ever been there, one of the things that you get there is like, one, nobody kind of knows your name. You're just kind of, for me, it was always, hey, what up, brother? You know, and it was like, but like resident, I remember still getting off, like I'm like this little kid in my backpack. And I still remember getting off the bus and like my neighbor, neighbor is a much broader term there. But he sees me get off the bus and he's just like, you hungry? And so he doesn't know me. Like he just hooks me up with a plate and I'm like walking home with a plate, eating Kahlua Pig. And it was wild. And I think like, but that had a tremendous effect on how I thought about and saw the world. And so, and I think it helped me because like, I had my father in my life until I was 11. My parents got divorced. We moved to Illinois. My parents got divorced. And it was where I think I had like that, what I experienced in Hawaii helped me kind of cope with that by essentially, very similarly, kind of having a village of people that had raised me. Like when I think of fatherhood in terms of like how it experienced in my life and why this conversation was interesting, it was like, I can think of about 30 plus men that have stepped in and filled a role in some way. And so it had a tremendous effect on me. And like now, and I think a lot about, now that I'm a dad, my oldest son is here. I'm not going to embarrass him. He knows I love it, but I won't know today. But like it makes me think of it as a dad, is like realizing like if I am thinking of being a father, one, only as a father to my kids, I have to also be thinking about like who are the other people in the world that are shaping their experience in their life. Because it made a massive, tremendous difference in my life. And I don't think I would have learned it had we not gone through kind of the travail that had happened. But now I know how important it is for me to be a present father, but for also my sons and my daughter to know other men that kind of fill the bucket in other ways more significant. So.
I gotta get tired. A lot of what was just said deeply resonates with me. I too, I'm a father, of course, and I hadn't seen my father for 12, almost 13 years of my life, and it was a very nasty custody battle and divorce, and now as an adult, and my dad as an adult, now being able to, for the last like 10 years, figure out this relationship of father and son to someone you don't really know and who kind of is like an uncle, you know, and he's trying to kind of flex his fathership, if that's even a word, on you, and it's like, yeah, listen, we homies, you know, I'm your son, but you know, but I didn't have like positive male role models. I looked around in my family, even when I was thinking about this question, every single man in both sides of my family have been divorced. On my mom's side and my dad's side. I didn't really have a good example of fatherhood because they themselves, a lot of them, were absent fathers. So I saw a lot of single motherhood and very aware of how that, like navigating that system, because my mom was in it. But taking, really refuge in not sports because the good Lord gave me a lot of things, but heights and physicality wasn't one of them. But different male role models that I had in my life that taught me what it meant to be a man. But when it came to be a father, it was kind of foreign to me, and kind of going as it was. I noticed that I'm the only one that got the fatherhood dress code. Right? I got the khakis and the the funny thing is, John Brown, I worked with him for a bit with Public Allies, and I remember we had a session about dress and why we dressed a certain way, and I answered, and then I was wearing a jacket and slacks to our sessions, and I said that I dressed that way because the world always making assumptions about me. Let me not give them another reason to. And it's just as we were speaking, and I haven't seen John Brown in a while. I was like, oh, why am I dressed like this? Like, it is not my natural dress. And I was like, oh, like, am I trying to turn into what I think a father should look like? And that just came to me in real time.
Can I just say, I remember very clearly how my dad was dressed.
Yeah.
And different, like one of the big things my dad always wore the undershirt, just that one white undershirt, and it was always ripped, always had holes in it, and he's running around, or the idea, or sometimes the image of my dad in the tidy whities and the white, that image is very much there.
Can we do without the mic? Can y'all hear us without the mic? Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, then we don't got it.
Because that would make life way easier.
There we go. So this next question goes on how all of us were talking about it a bit here, but how do you define fatherhood and not in juxtaposition to motherhood? So often we talk about parents and parenthood, whether it be motherhood and or fatherhood, we part of the definition is explaining the other. So now for you all, how do you define fatherhood, Michael?
I think my definition, it's probably always evolving, especially because my kids are 3 and 2 years old, so I'm still like early on with it. But I guess fatherhood for me is like I'm always reflecting back on like my relationship with my dad, and on one part. And so I think fatherhood, I define it as like, to me, being present and communicative with my kids, or letting them know that I'm there if they want to communicate. Whereas like not that my dad wasn't, but it was more like he worked, he came home, he was really quiet around the house, and like I remember growing up, and as a teenager, my mom would be like, "Oh, your dad said he doesn't want you to go to that party tonight," and I'm like, "Why did he tell me that?" And so I always want my kids to know like I'm open for communication, and I think to that question about like fatherhood not being in juxtaposition with motherhood, I think my ideas of fatherhood is always in relation to or critical of my ideas of masculinity. And I think we'll talk about like vulnerability too, but like though I'm always like thinking like am I being a parent? Am I like raising a child right now, or am I trying to like assert a sort of masculinity and like also teach them that there's a way of being in the world? Like, so I'm always like constantly thinking about that, often reflecting like what I just did or said as part of ways that fatherhood is shaping out for me at least.
And we can go down the line. I know you don't got the mic, or we all can just jump in.
I mean, I would say, two things came to mind to me as I thought about it. And one is that word presence, and that's something that I was very lucky to have a very present father, even in our kind of emotional, like stoicness, which has changed and evolved over time. And it's been a beautiful thing to see. But, when we talk about that village of people, those influences that we see, I had a lot of examples of homes with dads who were in, nuclear families who were very not present. So it was not a broken home, but this was not a present father, right? I had homes that you would say was a broken home where the father was still incredibly present. And so these definitions that sometimes drive that sense of, like you said, how do you measure being a good father? It's like it's not sometimes things like broken or not broken. It's like presence or absence. And so that's something that I think about a lot, especially as I navigate being a father with my son, and I'm torn by my own like stress from work and stress from this and like tiredness, and maybe I just want to like watch TV, and what does it mean to be present? And the other thing that kind of came to me as I was driving in was just like, it's like one of the few like just immutable laws of who I am now. Like if someone asks me like, what are you about? You're like, oh, well, I'm an editor. And I'm like, yeah, but I could not be an editor.
Yeah.
That is of me, but it's not me.
Yeah.
Oh, you're a musician. Well, yeah, but I could not be.
Yeah.
That is a big part of me, but that's not me. Even kind of like you're married. It's like, it is me.
Yeah.
But the fatherhood part is like that. Well, I cannot fathom, even in death, that not being me. You know what I mean? Because whether it's, and God bless that I go first, I'm still a father to him, right? Like whatever I left with him, I hope is still carrying through. So it's just like, I struggle to think of one other thing that's maybe as immutable a fact of who I am as a father, I guess, in some ways.
So first of all, I asked my daughter what I should say. And she wrote a little speech. So I'm just gonna being a father is hard, but it's worth it because you get to have fun along the way. And as your child grows, they ask questions. Some you may know and some you may not. But if your child knows one you don't, then they can teach you as much as you can teach them. It's really interesting because I think part of that, one of the things that I don't know if I struggle with, but I think there are two things that sometimes come in tension, is there is the idea of fatherhood as a father as a teacher, and the idea of also authority, and within that also caretaker, right? There's all those three kind of things as a father. Like, and when I say teacher, I not only mean like my father is a physicist, so I was the kid when I asked him why the sky is blue, he would tell me. But at the same time, it was very much I learned from my father values, right? What it means to be a person in the world with integrity and principle. And I think about that, and then I also think about though how I struggle with, like one of the ways I struggle with my dad the most is like he is very authoritative, right? He very much values like if I say it, you're not going to argue. Like if you argue with me, I'm going to win. And it's interesting because my daughter, me and my daughter, it's very interesting because she's an only child and she'll question me all the time. And as you can see, she thinks of her role is to teach me as much as I can teach her. So I think about that a lot. I think about the caretaking aspect. I think about that in the context of like, you know, like what my biggest fear is as a father, right? Which is that I won't be there, or that there won't be something. At the same time, knowing that I will not be, there will be times you'll be hurt and struggle, and there's nothing I can do about it. And so it's like trying to do that. I think those are all things that I think about, but I don't.
Yeah, I've thought about this one probably the longest. We were talking about questions because, like, part of it is like I got a sociology background, so I was like, I'm gonna be nerdy because that's just who I am. But I think like so for me, fatherhood when defining, I think like three kind of fundamental things. So like number one is like relationship, like your relationship to the child. That like to be a father is to have relationship. I think there's behaviors. There's like what we define as those behaviors. I think are culturally defined. There's some are socially defined. But it's like so when I think about fatherhood, it's like who and like what child, who's this child, and what is my relationship to this child? What are the behaviors that I ought to do? And then ultimately, like, and then what are the things that society demands that I play? What role am I to play? And so I think like when I define fathership, I think it's like holding that all in tension of like this relationship with this person, whatever that relationship may be, because again, I'm sure we'll get to it. I have a much more expansive understanding of what I think being a father is. It's like I coach football. Every single one of those dudes are my sons. Like it's how I see it, right? Like whether or not they feel that way, I feel that way. That my behaviors then have to be governed by my understanding that we are in a relationship and they're just not like a thing I'm bumping into. And then of course I'm also dealing with the tension of how society thinks I ought to behave with them and interact with them. And sometimes like we're in lockstep and sometimes we're not in agreement. Because like I'm much more apt to talk about things and some people think I should punish more. There's other times where I'm just like, nah, like I'm not gonna kind of replay the cycles of stuff that I dealt with. And so I think that's when I think about fatherhood, it's holding those three things in tension. And then you gotta like work and eat, sleep, and take a shower. Yeah. Right.
Wow. There's a few things that came up that really resonated with me. Well, Michael, you talk about the ability to have someone who's just open to communicating with you. You mentioned what John was saying. I remember just being shot down. I didn't have my dad around growing up, but just being shot down whenever I would question anything. To now, there's so much that she can say. She's 3, but like one of yours. I think, but already, my first Father's Day, my wife got me this like, something may have seen in the book that like, tell your future child like everything about you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so like, there's so many questions. And there's some questions I found, and I was like, oh, well, why am I being asked this? And I was like, oh, like I would have wanted to ask these questions, but even opportunity to ask these questions. So let me put my uncomfortability aside and answer these questions. For me, I started seeing myself define fatherhood, and I was actually doing an interview this panel this morning, and the interviewer asked me that same question: how do I define fatherhood? And I said, well, growing up, I can only remember 2 examples. Again, I was born in '96, so give me some slack. 2 examples of healthy black fathers on TV. And everything else were white fathers. And every other depiction of black or black diaspora men on TV was negative. So my idea of what fatherhood was what I was exposed to. And in that, I identify fatherhood as Linus was saying, like trying to take those elements of what I saw. Okay, I'm gonna be affectionate, I'm gonna answer, I'm gonna try to raise an inquisitive child, but also it also means grinding and working. Till this day, I find myself up at like 12, 1 a.m. in the morning, like, doing a job and then multiple gigs. Not because I have to, but because that's how I think like, father is. Even to the day, my daughter will, if you ask her why does Abba work, Abba means dad in Somali, and she'll say it's about me Chick-fil-A. So she sees that like a transaction. Right, so for me it's like, like
you want it, I'll get it. 'Cause I never got it. But also, I'm not healthy because then it's you set a certain expectation. But also seeing my wife become the default disciplinarian, and then her saying, "I don't want to do that anymore." So it's you, and then me having to set into a role that I'm not really comfortable in, which is saying no. So it's still a hard question for me to answer.
Yeah, can I just say,
Absolutely.
it's interesting because it's the opposite for me. You know, I'm always the one being like, you know, talking to my wife.
Yes.
Hey, we gotta clamp down on this, right? And this isn't. We gotta make sure that she understands she can't
do this.
Or you know, one of the things my wife will sometimes, you know, my daughter will complain about something, and my wife will apologize. Like it's an instinctive thing. And I'm like, wait a minute, no, you didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
Like I understand she's uncomfortable or she didn't like it, but you didn't do anything wrong. And it's interesting because it's that thing where, but at the same time, you know, there are moments where I feel like, okay, I should be more like that. We need to figure out how to set boundaries or rules as a way, but also understanding like there are plenty of times where I realize like I can, if I did just discipline her or just stop, like that doesn't do anything.
Right.
All it is that reaction to authority, which I remember very well. You know, that was it's just really interesting because I think society, our culture right now is dealing with questions about authority. Generally, like dealing with issues about discipline, authority, rules. How do we try to figure out, how do we get our people to act in a civil way without punishment, right? I work with a lot of people who've been through the criminal justice system and the criminal justice incarcerated system, and the criminal justice system is premised on this idea of punishment will produce good behavior, and it's very clear that it does not. It's very, very harmful. But at the same time, it's, you know, when you got a kid who's, you know, not picking up the thing, just doing things that they're not supposed to be doing, like, it's very difficult in that. So you know, I relate to that idea, but I feel it's interesting because my reflex is to be more authoritarian.
Yes.
Like, no, you gotta do this.
Yes.
And then try to go, wait, well, maybe I have to figure out a different way to communicate that without letting them, you know, go bonkers and
Outside the bounds.
yeah, exactly. Like,
How's that one for you all?
You know, I would say I'm almost on the default disciplinarian, but I'm more apt to do it. Like my oldest is here, so y'all know I can't lie, because he'll definitely say something. You know, I'll say this: I have a manifold approach. Like there are times where they will all tell you I'm very authoritarian. Today, they were supposed to clean up their stuff in the garage. They did not do that. They were made to go back outside and do that. You know, and I drilled them. And then there's other times where, especially with my oldest, very, very bright kid, like telling him I told you so doesn't mean anything. You know, he understood, like he knows the math to how to calculate the temper or the event horizon. Like telling him to do something because you said so doesn't matter, right? Like and so like dealing kind of like with a scientific mind, like his, like you could try to be authoritarian. You will drive yourself crazy because it's his full-time job to not listen. You know? And so I think with him, he and I, and he can tell me if I'm lying or not, but he and I do a lot more discussion. You know, we do a lot more discussion. And there's times where it's like, you know, the discussion is one-sided. But there's a lot of times where like I'll be like, okay, I really want to know, and he'll be like, honestly, I just didn't want to do it, and I'm willing to deal with the consequences if it means I don't have to do it. That pisses me off. but I also want, for me, it makes me happy to be like, my son can tell me to my face that he just doesn't want to do something. I'm gonna make him do it, but like he doesn't feel like I'm gonna like jack him up if he tells me, you know. And so there are times where I'm authoritative. There's times where I'm just like, all right, fine. You'll just be up all night washing these dishes, you know. And I've found that I've had to do it differently. My daughter, you gotta correct her because she was breaking down. But every kid's different, and it's I think fatherhood is that thing where like you spend your whole life being like, oh, where's that piece of the puzzle? And it's like, the piece of the puzzle's dead. Like they make you become something else. And I think like it's in the disciplinarian role of me realizing like, oh, my son's like me, you know? Like you also couldn't tell me just because I said something. I'm uninterested in that answer. And so I think like that's really where it came to me, where it's like I had to, more than anything, spend a lot of time being like, all right, I need these people to think, like I want them to live to 100 years old. They're going to be children for 18 of those. I need them to develop skills for everything that happens after that, which means I probably got to like check my ego. And so, and me and my wife just had that combo. It's like, it gets on your nerves, but that's a skill they need to have. And otherwise they end up growing up having to, honestly, come to trainers like me to tell them how to say no. And so, it's like, and I'm glad it keeps me paid, but also, like, I don't want my kids, I don't want their memories of their father being a person that was so unapproachable. And I genuinely am terrified of that. So.
Anyone else?
I mean, it's so. It's like I'm starting to learn about like I feel like for as much as my dad was pretty quiet around the house, I saw like other like friends, their fathers, and were very also authoritative and disciplinarian, and like I was really surprised to find out that I'm like very willing to be the disciplinarian, and then immediately after I am, I hate it. Like the other day, I could hear across the room my son was playing with some colored pencils, and I wasn't looking. In my mind, I thought my daughter grabbed them from him because I heard him crying, and I yelled across the room. I said, "Don't take them from him. Give them back. He was using them first." And then she was upset, and he was upset. And then after a few minutes, we cleared up, and then we went for a walk to the park. And I told her, "You didn't like when I got mad at you, huh?" And she's 3, and she was like, "I just wanted to hold the pencils." And I said, "My bad. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have yelled at you." She said, "I don't like when you do that." And I was like, "Okay, like, so this is gonna be part of how I gotta slow down and not just assume. I can't even assume when they're this little because they have their own world and minds working, and I need to have more discussion. So like, I don't like that I'm almost admitting right now that I'm figuring this out because I have to make the wrong step or what I realize isn't the right step. And but that's how I'm getting. Because when we have these dialogues. And I'm like, these dialogues I couldn't imagine having. I imagine them like when they're like 13 or something. Now I'm like 3 and it's like they're happening, and I feel so much better because then I go, okay, I want that also when they're 13, when they're 20 something, you know, like preparing like in that small way. And so I'm just like I'm learning like because sometimes they don't listen to their mother or whatever maybe, and I feel like I'm like that masculinity that I grew up with like I'm gonna step in the role real quick, but I don't actually. When I'm too like reflective to be like to live within like really stay hard on it. I don't like it actually.
I have the same relationship with the guilt. Just the other day, my daughter. Lately, we've been dealing with where my daughter will keep coming down. Like she's supposed to be there, she keeps coming down. And she will not stop. Like the last time she did it, I yelled at her. Go back to your room right now. And immediately you feel bad. And then immediately my reaction is to like go into her room and you know, she at that point is in tears and I'm trying to calm her down and I just remember I was laying in bed with her and just feel the worst. And you just but I just try to also remind myself like, all of the good, is like, even if you do something that you don't like or feel bad about, that doesn't define the relationship. It's really interesting.
And they're more resilient than we are.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. At time, with the gift of time, like they're gonna have a lot of experiences and interactions with us, and we have to learn. We have to have those moments, right, where our instinctive things comes out, and that's a balance of the homes we grew up in, the worlds we saw, just who we are naturally. That given day, it might be a Tuesday we might respond one day, the next Wednesday we might be in a different headspace or place. And when I think back to my own relationships, I'm like, I can remember specific moments, but the story of me and my father is a long story. And there were a lot of those things where, and I would love to know more from him about the parts where he learned, the parts where he acted instinctively. Because I feel that same guilt. I am not a natural authoritarian figure. And like when I have to, I'm the kind of person where it's like, if an act of mine like puts someone in the pool, right, then I'm jumping right in to save them. I'm just like, you know what I mean? Like if I have to create something where someone feels bad, then I try to save it right away. And that I've had to figure that out with my son, and so I have to give myself that grace, I guess. Of like, I'm gonna have those moments where I'm like, oh, that didn't feel good, and I'm like, dude, that's working. Like having that instinct, right? Of like, that's what you hope our kids do, is right? Is like act in the world, and if something teaches them, like, I didn't feel super good about myself when I did that. It's like, what do you do next time? And what do you take from that? So it's just a lot of learning I've found for myself.
I was gonna share something. I was like, oh, I'll share it. And this is, Ben and I were just talking about, what would be the future like if this became like a thing where fathers could come and it's like a talk like this, right? Fathers support. But like no, like as y'all were speaking, something came to mind with me. Is like when my wife, so she said it once, and then I actually never say it again, which was, wait till it's every day. I was like, at first I was like, yes, and I was like, no. It did not like me at all. I did not like that, because then there's this like dread when that's heard on their end, on the kids' end. In this era of talking about how we parent our children, and thinking about how you raise and parent your kids as a father, with the identities that you hold, how would you describe your experience fathering your sons in relation to their mother, or for your daughters, if you only have daughters, or if you only have a daughter?
So this is one that's very top of mind for me. I have 3 boys, and they already have kind of hit their varying degrees in which they will listen to their mom. And it's very, like, I don't know, it was kind of the same thing where you're like, I thought I'd be dealing with this later in life, and you're like, you're seeing like at 7, they just disregard their mom, like she's not talking. And I'm just like, and I won't lie, a really good friend of mine, and I talk about this all the time, I was like, initially, like, I get really mad about it, and it's the same thing, the same ego thing of like, man, this is ego though. This is like, I'm mad because they're like disrespecting my wife, and instead of me thinking about like, all right, is this how you ought to treat your mother? Because like, this is the first meaningful relationship you're going to have with a woman in the world, right? And it's like, and this is the first meaningful relationship you're going to have with a woman in the world, and I can't allow you to not listen to her. I can't allow you to disregard her feelings, And but it also is a massive challenge because like they are watching me, so I also have to do those things. And if you're married, relationships are complex. And so there's sometimes, like frankly, I actually shouldn't listen to her because she's wilding. But I actually have to like even not listen in a way that is respectful. To be like hear it out and be like, okay, let me tell you why I actually can't do that. You know what I mean? And so even because I think kids are 2 things, at least to me. They're clocks and they are mirrors. And I think like every year that my son gets older, it's like I've been a dad for 13 years. I tell him this all the time. Like he's the boy that made me a father. Right? And so like every year he gets older, like I know what time it is, like right. But I think the other thing is like when they're not being respectful to their mom, it's like I gotta check it, and then I gotta go do a thing with like Coach Krzyzewski used to do, kind of go get in the mirror and then like tell me off because in some way they're reflecting me back. And maybe I get to lie to myself more. I can be more refined about it. But I think it's one of those ones that like, but you still have to like. I feel like, at least in my experience, I have to approach it hard. Not like authoritarian hard, but like I have to approach it hard in a way that is like it is a line we draw, and they will tell you my demeanor changes because this is the first relationship you have with a woman. Like if you hit your mom, bro, Like, that's one of those ones. Like, if they hit their sister, they hit their mom, like, actually get them away from me. Like, you don't want me around. I'm not gonna handle it well. But us learning how to like listen, us learning how to communicate, it is something that I feel like is a daily conversation, and I just didn't think I'd be having daily conversations as young as 7.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, has blown my mind. Blown my mind more than anything else.
There's 2 parts to your question, and one part of it was like having conversations about race. You know, my daughter, she was in kindergarten, and it was really interesting because they were talking about Martin Luther King, and then they were also talking about George Floyd. And my daughter was essentially asking, George, I think she understood a little bit more about Martin Luther King, but she was trying to really understand about George Floyd and trying to figure out. And my wife is white, and the conversations about race were really, really interesting. She didn't understand. For instance, she still was like, "Why do they call us yellow? We're not yellow. Look at me, like our skin is not yellow." And then she, but we would have these conversations about, well, people are going to call you like Chinese American, Chinese or Asian American. And it's just fascinating to try to, a friend of mine got me a book which was like about hapas, which is a term that's used in Hawaii, about half Asian, half white children and their identities. And I'm flipping through it, and I just realized like I have very little ways to communicate what's that like. I don't know. Similarly, I realized like my father really had no idea what it's like to be Asian American. So he just didn't have that. Neither one of my parents had that, right? So there is that, and I'm trying to figure out like how and when my own experience dealing in this world in race can translate, and then to her at the same time that I know that it won't be the same and it'll be very, very different. As for like gender, I think it was really interesting because my daughter, when she was really young, like 3 or 4, gender was the big thing that you could classify people. Is this a boy thing or is this a girl thing? Is like she has her school uniform has buttons, and she thought that that's not a girl thing. So she hated, she always would wear a sweatshirt. She hated to share that. And she was really conscious of, is this a boy clothing or girl clothing? Black was a boy color. You can't wear black. It was really, really interesting. At the same time, like I'm trying to make also the space, it's like her gender could change. Ideas of that could change, and we're trying to figure that out. And it's a really interesting thing to kind of have that conversation sometimes. And now I'm seeing, her. It's sad because because when she was really young, she can have friendships with boys, and now she really exclusively has friendships with girls, and trying to see how that relates to her future relationships with boys, or whether or not she herself may have, she has family members who are, same-sex marriages and all of those things, and some who will, and her conversations about gender identity are fascinating. Like her and her friends would talk about another kid who was a trans kid, and it was just normal thing. But it's more like I'm learning, again, she's told me I can learn something, and it is, rather than me trying to figure something out that I can teach her. So, appreciate it.
I haven't, these like situations haven't come up, I think, because my son's like 2, but I'm like thinking ahead, planning ahead. But yeah, I think with him, it's gonna come down to like, he isn't like, he won't listen to me or sometimes, and so sometimes it's just like he just wants our attention and to like talk to him about something and to or to just give him attention, to like instead of putting this thing like to sort of make a game of it, and then that way you're paying attention to him as opposed to just like, and it's just like me figuring out like how do I approach him in a way that we can have a conversation, which I hope will lead to if he continues like, if he doesn't listen to his like his mother or disrespects his mother when he gets older, hopefully that like, communication line is like always has been built up. So I haven't encountered that really yet, but it's on my mind now.
I would just say for me, you know, kind of how other people have been saying, you know, it's, a lot of it's just it's dependent on your child. You know, every child brings a different kind of part of the equation to what part of you then comes out to meet that person. And I guess in that way, I feel, you know, fortunate in that I think for my wife and I, we share a lot of similarities in our instincts in parenting, and I think that's just a part of the factors of who I get to be then as a father, right? You know, it would be a different scenario if I felt out of step in that way, I guess, with some of those instincts around what does punishment look like? What does encouragement look like? What does, you know, giving them too much look like? Or, you know, that sort of a thing. And so I feel like we've been fairly shoulder to shoulder in that way. And it's been more a kind of a united thing of like looking at our son and trying to encourage him almost towards spaces where, because he's just such a people pleaser, which I think comes from how we are. And so it's kind of like, I've noticed there's not as much kind of authority that has to come, and it comes either from me or from my wife, and it's almost more sometimes just encouraging to have more of an opinion and more of a voice and like put himself first and be like, what do you want to eat for dinner? Oh, whatever. Yeah, but what do you really want? It's like, I'm good with anything. I'm like, I know you are. Thank you, I love you, but like, what do you feel? Like, if you could have anything in the world, what do you want? He's like, whatever you want. And I'm just like, God bless you, but like, it's okay to have an opinion. It's okay to walk through this world and have an opinion. And so I think that's just something where for us, I'm grateful we're fairly similar in terms of how we parent with our child in that way. And then so then the he that we both get is fairly similar, right? I guess is what I'd say. It'd be a totally different thing if we had a second child, or if, you know, we were in a different kind of equation. So it's just each individual moment is its own truth, I guess, in that way.
You know, this is one reason why, you know, the fact that the single fathers that were here last week were a lot of similar things that you were saying. It would just be overlaid being a single parents or co-parenting. So, for the future, being able to have that cross conversation. I know for me, people would always say, not that family, you know, just people. They would say like, oh, don't you want to have sons? I'm like, you know, or did you want a son? I'm like, well, what is it that I can't do with my daughter that I couldn't do with a son? Right? You know, I braid her hair and then we do wrestling moves on the bed. You know, like there's
Yes.
There you go.
Those are the best things.
Yeah, you know, so
I didn't realize there was a choice.
it's just normal, you know? So, the next question I have for y'all is, do you believe in general, and we kind of touched on showing emotion, but do you believe fathers in general are allowed to show authentic love? Why or why not?
This is a good question, especially what do you mean by allowed, right? Like by themselves? I guess there's different issues there, right? Like there's allowed by our communities, allowed by our society, allowed by expectation, allowed by our own family units, and then also allowed by ourselves. And I mean, the answer for me is like, in general, I certainly hope so. I mean, I certainly hope so. I think for me as a son, you know, it's not surprising that we get in this panel and we spend so much time talking about our own fathers, right? In whatever capacity they were with us or not. And I think of looking at how I've never doubted the authentic love of my father, and I've also said part of it is learning how to read that authentic love too, as he has learned how to share that, and that has shifted over time. When he lost his father, especially, I noticed a vulnerability came out in his ability to share his authentic love. And in words even more, I always felt it, but I just noticed a shift. And that kind of put me into a trajectory where I got to become a father, having seen him pass that threshold in his own life and open up. And I felt that and experienced it as a son, and it made me pass it along. So I guess I felt lucky to be able, I've been in a safe space to show that authentic love. I can imagine that for a lot of people, it doesn't feel safe to do that. And I certainly saw that when we talk about, again, being in a village of people. I certainly saw how homes, I had friends where that was not as safe. It wasn't a safe place to share that. Right? Which in its own way refracted my own gratitude for what I had in that home. And then I saw homes where it was really gregarious open, right? Like really gregarious. And I was like, whoa, you know, like, and it's kind of amazing to see that side of it too. It's like a beauty. It's a remarkable continuum, I guess.
So I'll just share like the before parenthood and after parenthood thing. One aspect was, so I have a friend of mine who is a mother, and I think at one point her kid's slightly older, and at one point she would talk to her children and she would say things like, she would say "my love," referring to her child, talking to her child, "Oh yes, my love," or "my love." And I remember feeling like, oh, that's a little uncomfortable. And then I had, my daughter, and I sing all the time. I hear myself saying, what in the world am I doing? And I say it, I go, oh yes, my love. And I wonder too, I really wonder, because I don't have sons, I wonder whether there would have been a different thing if I had something. Like whether I could say something like, my love. And I don't know. I think I would hope so, but I don't know. I really don't. My father certainly would never have done that. But yeah, I am not physically like other, people are huggers and people like to. I'm not usually, but with my daughter, like we are constantly, touching each other, like in terms of like she's always on my lap, or reading, or we're leaning on. Yeah, exactly. That's just that. And so, and I feel very keenly that she's 8, and I probably only have a couple more years, right? Like that's, I think about that a lot. It's like, okay, there's going to be a point that's going to get cut off.
Yeah, it's like that part in like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse where he's like, I love you, I love you, say it back, I love you. And I feel that way with my 13-year-old because I say it to him all the time. And there's this great period where he would say it back all the time. And now he'll be like on Discord with his friends. And I'm like, hey, I gotta head out, I love you. And he's like, uh-huh. And I'll be like, and I had to learn to just kind of be like, all right, I get it. Because,
I had to break my daughter though. She would not say I love you back to me when she was really young. And so I've been in this grace period for the last 3 years, and she's saying it now, and I know it's going to go away too. It drove me crazy because she would say it to her mother, and wouldn't say it to me, and I'm like, what's going on?
I would say, I'm going to tell y'all a story, because I think this is what happened before I became a father. It made me think about how I wanted to handle it. So I have a really good friend. Her dad died a freshman year of college. And he was like, he never told her he was proud. He never like those. But she has this story that she clings to, and it's a really great story. The first time she ever made the honor roll, he heard about it and he ran from their house to her school, full sprint in his suit, right from work. He came home from work and he heard that she made his suit. Takes off, cheek. I mean, and so he sprints and he goes to look, and he goes to look and see, and that was the only story she has, right? And so the thing that I had started very early before I had kids was I'm not going to make my kids interpret how I feel about them. And I'm not going to demand that they give it back to me. I'll joke, I'll tease them or whatever. But for real, they should know. And because I think her losing her father and seeing how that'll crack you in half, man. It was wild. And so I think, we are very much good night, give everybody a hug every night. I love you at night. Good morning. I love you before you go to school. You know, my oldest, I still got, he'll still tell me back. I think my third, Kai, he won't say that. Never mind. It's like state secrets. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you ever hear Kai say he loves something, he really loves it. But I think, like, for me, I think, and I see myself as a progression in my family. You know, my grandfather was World War II vet, like, you know, that kind of thing. Like, he was it's not that he was a hard man, he was just a tough man. You know, and it was crazy because, like, even he was like almost 90 when he died. And it's like his skin was like, I still remember it was like really, really smooth. Almost like that dude never had care in the world. And he was like fighting with the Klan, he was fighting Germans. Like, he was like, I don't know how you so unwrinkled, bro. Do it, boss. Right? But you know, thinking of him, because when he was 2, he was abandoned by his parents in the woods. And they found him, he was sitting on this log near a fire that had smoldered, and his leg fused to the log. Right? That was how my grandfather grew up, like left somewhere. Right? And then, you know, my father grows up and, you know, he was basically sent to go live with his grandmother. So he did not have his parents. And so I saw myself as like a progression of like, man, you know, I never, obviously, my kids left anywhere fused to nothing. And I'm never going to send my kids off somewhere to be with somebody. And so I think it was just really important to me where it's like, man, I just don't want to continue this thing. So I was there, like, I cut every umbilical cord. I was the first person to hold all of them. Like, it was really important to me to be like, man, y'all don't know from the first minute, like, how I feel about you. It was the first thing I said to Mark when he was born. It was crazy. I like to talk to him when my wife was pregnant, like every day. I like read a book or whatever. And when he was born, I told him I loved him, and then he like turned his head and looked at me. And for me, like, that still lives in my mind, right? Like, as like, they're listening. And so, like, I just gotta say it. However they take it in is how they take it in, but I don't want my kids interpreting it. Because I don't want, when I'm gone, I don't want my kids telling a story about the one time their dad like, did something that communicated to their kids, they had to interpret how he felt or anything. That just can't be that.
Yeah, so, I mean, the interesting thing is my son is more of a hugger than my daughter is. And I got home the other day after being gone for like 4 days. And I came into the house and he heard me and he like, usually he'll like run and call to me. And then we stopped, we saw each other across the room. And then we looked at each other like, he's been missing in my life for a few days. And he like came over and he like hugged me and he kissed me on the lips. And it was just like, I just want to be tender with him as long as he will let me, but so that he'll know, right? The interesting thing about the question is like, are we allowed to show authentic love? I think I have a privilege of my friends and family knowing that I'm a poet and that I've been a poet, so I'm always like that sensitive guy. And I would always be secretly the friend that my homies came to talk about shit they were going through. But after I became a father, I am way more willing to also reach out to them and not just wait for the conversation. I think because I know that they are also somebody's, for my homies, it's like they're someone's son or they're someone's daughter. And I feel like everyone is always, more often than not in my experience, wanting to talk about something or just to be sat with and listened to. And so I think I'm more willing because like, I can always be like, I'm a dad, I can sort of, you can sense these things. And having the privilege of being a poet is people will know like, I'm going to be like the softer, tender one. It's not going to come out of nowhere. I've been doing this shit for like 15 years. And so that's been really interesting to experience. But I do feel the authentic love sort of, it was like, I got a ticket for it in public, to be in public with authentic love, like once my daughter was born. I have a really brief example of like, she was born with jaundice, so I remember taking her on the porch. She was like a week or two old, and I was like playing some music on the phone, dancing with her on the porch. And then like somebody was walking by and looked at me like odd, like why is this man dancing on the porch? And I turned and they saw I had a baby in my arms, and then they smiled and kept walking. So it was like weird that like I couldn't just be dancing on the porch as a man. Yeah. But because I turned and had my child with me, they were like, oh, that's cute. It's really odd, but I was like, I'm lucky I could do it, I guess. It's a weird still frame that men are kept in, but yeah.
No, I think it's like whenever I go out with my daughter, and it was just her and me, and we go eat to somewhere, I just feel a lot of people like in approval.
Having a show, hitting your show.
Yeah.
They're like, you're doing it.
Which is so interesting
Isn't
to me, like, because it is this idea, like, oh, look at
It's like,
look at that.
Yeah.
Well, because like previous generations are
Yeah.
such a low bar.
And it's true. Like I took my.
Right now, it's fucked up, right?
It is, yeah. Like I took my son to Planet Fitness the other week because we have to like work on ourselves for some physical stuff. And people actually stopped what they were doing, came over and they said, "I just want you to know how amazing it is to see you with your son working out." And it felt really good. But I was just like, "Isn't this what I should be doing? Like, isn't this like the social contract, you know, that I have with this?" But it, I don't know. It was a very like interesting thing that people would stop and come over to a stranger and reinforce me, like give me like love, basically. And I don't know. I've still been thinking about it. It's like, what was it about that? Because I wasn't doing that much weight. It wasn't that impressive.
And I think in some ways it's like really messed up to my wife and to the women in our lives. But I also think like I'm just so okay with and like so accepting of like happy about getting the chance to be tender for all the years that I felt the things, but wasn't sort of allowed to based on what I grew up with and chose to adhere to and like was really instilled in me as a man, right, in that sort of traditional sense. So I'm actually like I'm very much enjoying the tenderness that I get to have and that is afforded me as a father too.
Can I ask you guys one question? One question I have is like, how does it make you feel when your child is really affectionate towards you? Because a lot of times when she's very affectionate towards me, of course it feels great, but I also feel a little like, I don't know, I feel like the rules should be different. I don't know, like my daughter will like try to take care of me. And I don't, I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't know.
Yeah, I'll say for me, it's like, don't get too early. You'll be doing that later. Like it's like like enjoy life now. Because when I'm all broke down, I expect you to take care of me. But no, I mean, I think for me, I just want them to know that they can. I think because there are times where you worry. You be like, Lord, please don't let this boy be no psychopath. You know what I'm saying? I'm just being real with you. And so there's times like when they do that, you be like, okay, yes. And I'm gonna tell a story. I won't say what kid it is, but there was a story like watch this movie, and like because like you just don't know, kids aren't always affectionate. They don't always want to initiate or whatever. So this movie, I can't remember what it was like a kids movie, but like there's like apps on the phone, and one of the apps got deleted, and one of my kids was like crying in bed, like, man, that was so wrong. She ain't deserve to get deleted, bro. And I was just like, yes,
right.
Because I didn't cry until I was like 20. I mean, after being a kid, like once I became like a teenager, I didn't cry until I was like 25.
Yeah.
And that was after like one of the most important people in the world died. I mean, that's wild. And so like, yeah, I mean, it does feel weird sometimes because you also don't know what to do with it. Because like sometimes they do it at the wrong time. You're like, bro, I'm trying to chill. You're like, why's your face gotta be
Right.
But I do appreciate, because like my daughter all the time, she's like, can I make you some breakfast in bed? And I'm just like, shoot. Sometimes I tell her just be brave about it on it.
Right.
But like I do appreciate that they do want to take care, but I agree with you. Like there's times where it's like, you have time before.
No, but I love the way you put it, which is I just don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is like what she is. I just don't know what to do with it. It is like I recognize it's precious. It's really amazing, but I also just don't know.
Right. But it's like, I mean, we talk about that idea of just pouring that love into them so they never have to wonder, so they never have to decode it or decipher it, right? And it doesn't matter about how we get it back in the moment. Like I understand, like my son should not have to tell me he loves me when he's on Discord. You know what I mean? Like with his buddies. Like that is not the space for me to make him do that. But I will say that there have been times when he can tell I'm having a hard day, and out of the blue, he'll just like give me a hug and be like, "You're just the best dad." And it's just like random and out of nowhere, but very obviously a response to what he can see as a hard day for me. Like it's not rote, and it's not just like I love you too, and it's like, I think that I don't know if he would feel that openness to bring that to me if I wasn't so open bringing it to him without the expectation of, and it's gotta come back, it's gotta come back, it's gotta come back. Like, enjoy it when it does, but the belief, right, is that someday when those moments happen, because we were so open and pouring it this way, they're gonna feel that safety of pouring it back, and whether that's like toast and butter, and a bread, or those moments, and it takes you off guard a little bit sometimes, right? Because you're used to giving it, you're used to giving it, and maybe there's a safety in that space, right? Maybe it gets to some of that masculinity side of like the first step past that is to be comfortable giving it. What does it mean to be comfortable receiving it? That's like a whole other.
Yeah, I mean, I love it, but it has been surprising at times because I wasn't expecting it at all, and I think what makes it uncomfortable as far as like my masculinity is that it's so beautiful, and in my mind it's an example of what maybe how they would be with people in the world, but it also makes me realize like, oh, I'm more fragile than I thought, because that is so.
Because it means so much.
Yeah. Because you didn't like prep them to do it, and they just did it, and it's just like, and what's surprisingly comfortable is that you're like, oh, it made you feel how you want to feel towards them, and they feel it towards you. Right.
But there's times they would hit you and you're like, yeah, man. It's all good, man.
No, but it has a weird, like, a lot of the times it feeds into itself.
Yeah.
But then it also can make me feel like I don't want her to worry about me.
Right, because you're used to being like, I'm good. I'm the strong. Right. Yeah.
She's partial.
Yeah.
Right.
Take a little singing. Yeah, we got so we have folks ask questions. But really briefly, before we transition into the questions that folks had, would like to hear briefly, like in a sentence. We have all heard messages of fatherhood given to us. What is one message of fatherhood that you would want to impart on your children and then all those that are listening?
Don't be inflexible.
It is so much fun. I feel like that gets lost because I think we have a culture on trying to understand or realize that good things can be hard. But I think we kind of lose sometimes the message that it is so much fun. Yeah. Not every day, but like there are days where the best days, the most fun I've had is just in bed. Yeah, having a conversation with her. I remember when like around those days, when you get to paint with her, like I never painted in my like still as a child, and now I'm doing it with her. It's like this is fun.
I think I would say fall in love with the mundane. Like when I think about everything I've ever missed in my life, it has never been like the times we went to like Six Flags. It was like I missed the time of like kicking it on the stoop and laughing until I couldn't see. Yeah. And so I think like it's the same thing with being a parent. Like just fall in love with the mundane because you do that more than anything else.
I think for me, it's like, this might be being an editor, being a writer. I'm also just a talker. I'm a talker. But like, when I think of the things that have been communicated between me and my son with no words whatsoever, and just recognizing the language of presence, the language of silence, the language of whether it's simple touch, a hug, just a look, like sometimes words really do fail, and sometimes that's okay, and I have to remind myself of that for all that I can sometimes find through words, I think I've delivered a lot to him through just no words.
And now it's the time we transition. If folks have any questions, they'd like to ask any other panelists here. I come from a teaching background, so I'm very okay with silence. I'm one of you pause.
Did you have some questions?
So you so on. who were the two television role models? I can't say one of them because he's not even popular no more.
I might have robbed it from a lot of us.
Yeah. So one was one was the Cosby Show. We had growing up. Cosby Show was not running when I was growing up, but we had all of the seasons on DVD. We had that. So we didn't have cable going, so we would just watch it, all of them, and that was on film.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
10 out of 10.
I'll step away so the mic doesn't catch it. But I guess my biggest question that I was thinking about is did being a father change the way you see the world and how you navigate your relationship with yourself too? Carrying that nurturing for yourself as well, learning how to do that kind of thing, or has it done anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yes, it has changed me quite a bit. I'd say this all the time. I played college football back in the day. It was I thought I was a motivated guy. If I had kids, I'd have made it to the league. The complete abandon that I started to live life with. About just the stuff I stopped caring about. It really did it literally was, I remember seeing Marcus and just was oh, this stuff doesn't matter. I mean, it was almost instant. It was almost instant. And it's funny because people tell you that and you're just how does it happen? I don't know. I just know I had a different level of motivation almost immediately after. And so what that does is yes, I wasn't reckless. I wasn't wilding in the streets, but I was definitely one of those people that was I would be risky. I'm not risky. I'm I got kids, and I'm going home. I'll see y'all later. And now I'm working on my fitness and my sleep and all that stuff because now it's not even about me. It's the realization that the monument I'm trying to build is no longer mine, and I got to be around to build it, and that means there's a whole lot of stuff I got to stop doing. And so I think that's really what it was. It was starting to set good habits, getting up and going to the gym. More than anything, for them to see me getting up and going to the gym, going to bed, if nothing else, for them to see me going to bed. It's cooking at home. And so, yes, I think fatherhood dramatically changed because it goes from what you think you're going to do to what you better do if you want them to have these habits.
Yeah, I would echo all of that for sure. And then I know for me, and this might be with my son, we have a lot of similarities. It's almost like an odd form of time travel, and you get a replay tape of your own life. And obviously, I'm not saying it's the same, but as you watch your child kind of move through these stages, you can't help but it just brings it back in. I mean, I live a lot of my life in my memory, and I like thinking back on that time. I like kind of playing back through my life and picking it apart and wondering at the mystery of it and all that. But there's something about walking it with your child that does transformed me very internally in the idea that I feel I'm time traveling sometimes, and that's a really magical experience. And I know that that's not anything to put on him. That's not anything to live through or it's his own thing. But I still can't help but be in the glow of it, I guess. And it makes me think about myself differently. It makes me see my own past moments differently, which is maybe part of the greatest gift too, is it's like a triangulation of interpretation. Me at 5, before I had James, to glance my memory off of, I saw myself differently than I do now that I saw him at 5 walk through something and be oh, I don't think I could have seen myself from that same angle without seeing him. And that's a very profound part. And it's something that's grown as he's gotten older, as he got into those further stages. So that's a real gift for me, yeah.
Any other questions?
I got one.
I think it's you and him.
It's kind of in alignment with this one a little bit, but I was thinking about messiness and how there's this masculine perception that you're supposed to be like together, and also like know the answers, and in the father role, I think there's a lot of that going on. But like, I just had this conversation with my 21-year-old son, and I was like, he's visiting with his girlfriend for the first time, and she's like, kind of doesn't know what to do about like being in a house with a single dad with 3 boys, and it's messy, but it's not bad. It just doesn't look like what it is on TV. And so I was saying to him, I was like, dude, it's fine for it to be messy. Like that's what it's supposed to look like. But I realized that it's taken me 45 years to get to that point where I'm okay saying messy is actually the truth, and that has come from being kind to myself, but I never did. It used to be that way. So I was just curious, like, I mean, for me, I did it solo, so then I was also beating myself up because I was like, oh, well, I must have done something wrong because there's not a woman here with me doing this. But I'm just curious, like, what that like allowing yourself to be messy in front of your kids and teaching them the truth, like how that relationship is with yourself too, and what that's taught, what's shown up for you guys with that.
I think one of the things, it's slightly related, in the sense that, like, well, I'm very messy, just generally. But I think more along the lines of what, because I was thinking about the earlier question, and then your question relates to that, which is like my fears and being open about that, and that it's okay. Like one of the things that one of the things that I've seen my daughter go through is having to navigate relationships, and she's got these friends, and they get into fights, and some of it is there's some bullying behavior on some situations, and then also trying to figure out like what to do when she's uncomfortable, right, or when she's upset or sad, and then it has led me to think about all the times where I'm feeling those things and how I express them, and then what to do about that. And so when you say messiness, it's kind of what I'm thinking of. It's like how my fears sort of leak out, and how my fears are part of that, and that that I'm a generally anxious person, and that I can't, but I have to navigate that anxiety without trying to show that I know everything, right? I mean, I think that to me is what it is. I don't really have a great answer like how I deal with it. I'm trying to be more accepting of that, but I do think that is something that I think about a lot, and I don't know. I think we live in such a weird time, and the anxiety about the world is everywhere, and in trying, there have been times where I really kind of sometimes think about how I would figure out what to do with my family if things go really bad, and I just don't know.
I think for me, like messiness, it brings up this idea of like presentable and presentability, and like so I have competing sort of feelings. One is like you can present messiness as like a loving household, right? But also like if I want to, and I will bring in like race into it. I mean, I grew up where I live, I grew up in Southern California, a very brown place. Now I live in a very white place, and I have that whole like dirty Mexican stereotype like in my head about like, so when they get older, like do I want the house to be presentable in a way, because I don't want my kids who are going to be among mostly white kids to be thought of as a certain way. But then I compete with that with my privilege of like I'm middle class, I'm a university professor. Presentable is also messy because we love them, and so like it's really complicated, I think. But most of the time the house is a fucking mess.
That's how it is for me too, and I think what I've tried to discern is like that messy can still be full of care, right? And that the point is not necessarily that it's exactly this or exactly this, but that there's a care involved, and that care leads first and foremost to hearts and souls and bodies and people in love, right? But it also does extend to the places we inhabit and the homes that we create for ourselves, the gifts of things that we have. And so I hope that what James sees in my messiness, right, which is a messiness of papers and books and guitars and printing shit, and I hope that he still sees care, I guess, right? And that's what I hope. And yeah, so that's just one of the things that I've kind of thought about, especially in a space where sometimes you're like, I have a choice between spending a lot of time cleaning this or being present in a different way. And what do I do with that balance, right? Because you want that home to feel full of love, and so you want it cared for, and yet the care that I want is more towards my son than my want sometimes. You know what I mean? And so I don't know. It's a competing thing, like you were saying.
I think for me, I have a very existential view on it, which I'm sure drives my wife crazy from time to time. But I understand the fundamental meaninglessness of most things, and so it keeps me from kind of like hating the thing that makes the whole thing worth it. Me and my son had a really, my oldest son had a really good day, and he was like in the car, and he's just like, I wish this day could last forever. And I was like, well, then it wouldn't be special. Like, it is in the fact that this is the first and last time we will do this. It's what makes this be that feeling, right? But I have a hard time attaching myself to concepts like together, because I know that like 99.99% of all people that have ever lived in the world have been forgotten in the dust.
Yeah.
And so it's like, who cares if you think my house is clean, right? and it's just like, I won't remember you. History won't remember either one of us. Like this house that we live in, we lived in by someone else. Like when we're like, so I think for me, it really has been like, and I have PTSD. So like one of the things is like, there's times like when I'll just snap. Because I'll just be like, I'm upset about something. I'm like, yo, that's my bad. You're not gonna go back. That's messy. Human is messy. And so for me, it's like, I had to break myself. Like when I went to therapy to deal with my PTSD, that was a thing. It was like I was caging myself. And I was caging my anger. And I was caging all these things to make myself more palatable. It was driving me crazy. And I think it was like when I gave up on, like the only house that's totally clean is one where no one lives there. Like there's never a time where laundry is always done. Laundry's in process, right? Like there's never a time where there's no dirty dish except for when we're asleep, right? Like, and when you realize that like everything else is a process and most of that stuff don't matter, the only things that do matter is like, man, am I going to scream at you all the time about a mess that's just going to be there again tomorrow? Like, man, like, I don't know. It just feels empty as hell. Like, and so I think that's what it comes down to. And my son will tell you, even when it comes to grades in school, like I don't give a crap if you get A's. I give a crap if you try. Like if you try, like he's a smart dude, like real smart dude. You should get A's because you're dope like that, right? Like that's what it is. Like I don't care about the grade. I care about your effort. And so it is the way. Like I'm wild. My wife would say that I'm just like all over the place because I'm messy and I love messy. And if you're not messy, you're lying. You can't tell me you want your house clean like that all the time. Sometimes you don't, whatever it is. And so I think like that's how I deal with messy. All my kids know, like nobody's gonna put it on the tombstone, kept a really neat house, right? Like, how did you make people feel? How did you treat people? Did your life mean something? Does somebody remember you? I really have gotten to the point where success is like, does somebody remember you? And so like that's how I deal with messy. Like I don't want them to remember me hiding mess. I want them to remember like, dang, my dad was silly and he would have a temper sometimes and he could cook though. Like, I just want, that's all I care.
I appreciate that. I wish that I had a temper sometimes, because it's messy, it's not perfect, right?
At all.
I do think like it's interesting in terms of messiness. I'm a very messy person, but my wife is not. And I've had to really understand that things having their place and picking things up and being in, for her means quite a bit, and having to navigate that. And then having my daughter also understand that as part of the whole family. Like, we all have a role to keep this space, in a way that, I don't know if the idea is presentable, but in a way that's just, yeah, because boy, when I was single for a long, long time, it was very, very difficult. But yeah, I do think it's interesting because we have everyone has such an interesting relationship with their space. Like, for me, I don't even see messes. Like, messes happen and it doesn't register. I will walk over, I'll step over piles of clothes, I will leave dishes in places and not care. I drive my wife crazy. I have like teacups everywhere.
Oh yeah.
I'm right behind you. Exactly. I have like 4 teacups right by my bedside table. I can bring back.
Very kinds of molds.
Exactly. But my wife, for her, it's like, how can you not see this? How can you? And for her, like, that level of chaos is very. It means different. But it's interesting. I guess it's the way that I never really connected being clean as meaning you got things together, or then being messy as in you don't have things together. I just think of that as some people are messy, some people are clean. I will say a lot of times people look at my office and it's a complete mess. And there was a study done at the U of N saying, like, people with messy offices are more creative. So.
That's true.
What I keep telling myself.
And I think I have one last question.
Originally it was much more like open-ended or broad, but I have like a more condensed version of this question. It's sort of going back to the little speech that you were given of just like, what are things that you have learned from your kids? And in the broader sense, that could be things that you learned about like yourself or about fatherhood or about the world, or in a more literal sense of just like ways that they have taught you about something and you sort of had that moment of like, oh, this teaching goes both ways.
I mean, this is kind of mundane, but it's the one that comes to mind. Is I lived overseas in 3rd grade in a country where I couldn't speak the language, and so I spent the whole school year playing marbles. Like, I literally really didn't go to school for the year, but they still just passed me back in Chicago on to 4th grade. And so as my son went through 3rd grade, I learned all of these 3rd grade things that I'd never learned, like about planets and about like, is the moon a star or a planet? And it became this year-long joke where like he would really laugh that I didn't know these very foundational things. And I was like, you have to understand, I was just playing marbles for the whole year. Like, I couldn't speak Swedish, so I just went to school and they just smiled at me and then they gave me marbles and I just played marbles until the end of the day. But I literally learned like 3rd grade with him. And that's a mundane thing, but it also very much wasn't, and it was a kind of fun, jokey, bonding thing that actually does mean it's a really good memory. So, there are more profound things than that, but that is definitely, when it comes back to the whole fatherhood is also just fun. Mm-hmm. That was just fun. Yeah. It was a gift to me to have that, so. And I still can't remember if the moon is a star or a planet. It didn't really stick. It didn't stick.
I think one thing about what I learned from my daughter and interacting with her is so much how much it's what you do rather than what you say. I think I'm a talker, and but realizing like, no, showing and doing are the ways, that if you want, if I want to live those values that you try to teach them rather than speaking them. And so I think that's one thing that I see from my daughter, because she will react, because a lot of times what she will say is like, she'll try to process something and being like, but but you didn't do this, or why did you do this, rather than she won't remember anything, the words that were used.
I think what I learned from my kids about is like is more about like how becoming an adult requires you to like abandon the things that make life fun. All of my kids are very curious. Like on the way here, my oldest son was like, "Did you know that the event horizon of a black hole is 4 dimensions, but because it's infinitely flat, we would experience it as 3?" I'm like, bro, I'm not going nowhere near that. I would not be experienced either way, cuz, right? But he's curious. And then but all of them, they'll come in and be like, "Oh, did you know this thing?" And then I'm like, and then when I talk to adults, how often does an adult just like randomly in a meeting be like, "Did y'all know?" And I'm just like, man, and then all of my kids draw, they all paint, they all do whatever. I'm like, I can't remember the last time I saw an adult just draw. Right? And I think like my kids remind me that like, oh, for real though, like life is trying to, like the best life is trying to stay like them.
Yeah. Right.
As long as humanly possible. And so I think that was the biggest lesson I have learned and learn every day is to stay curious and not take myself too seriously and like draw and like sing badly if I have to. That like kids do things not because it's gonna make them money or make them famous, they just do it because it's fun. And I'll give this last one because my friend is an art teacher. His daughter was like, "Dad, what do you do for work?" He was like, "Oh, I'm an art teacher." I'm like, "What does an art teacher do?" "Well, I go to class and I teach like adults how to draw." She was like, "What? They forgot?"
Oh.
And you were just like, "Yo, that hurts and get it away because I'm gonna have to box her for keeping it too real." Right? But like, it was just like, man, like they forgot. Like every kid is creative, every kid is curious, every kid is open and they want to connect. And then we grow up and we think being like jaded and uncreative and saying things like synergy is like the end of life. And so I just think that's what I learned from them. It's just like, even though they drive me freaking nuts half the time, I'm just like, I gotta be like them because they just have a lot of fun shooting each other with the water hose. And like they don't need Netflix. I mean, they like Netflix, but they don't need Netflix. They'll be happy.
I think my answer is the same. Being curious and like getting to experience those things. Like I might have when I was a kid, like playing out in the rain, but I get to do it again and like reminding that curiosity. I'm a poet. I should be aware of the world as much as my kids are. But like my daughter the other day was just like, "Why are the trees tall?" And I was like, "What?" But then it's like the world is really large. That's right around our block. And like I just never think about it. And she's like, "Look at this stick." And I'm like, "That's a pretty cool stick, huh?" I don't think about it as much as I should, as I think I actually do, because it's like my fucking profession. But like it's not. It's just life for them, and I love that. I'm slowed down in that way.
Any other questions?
Library closes at 8, so we unfortunately I've got to be there.
Nope.
Snap. This has been amazing.
It has been amazing. Oh my goodness. Wow. Thank you guys. So I would just like everybody, including our camera people, to fill out these surveys. And it's been so fun, John, watching your child laugh.
Oh, yeah.
You know, this is really nice. I thought he was going to sit there and draw me. He was engaged.
There we go.
Wow. So thanks everybody for coming.
Yes.
We do have, Michael has books for sale, I believe.
I have some.
And we also have our anthology for sale. It's $18.95.